many years ago, I wrote a piece in which I said that I believed that artificial intelligence was going to emerge from the project to get a computer to translate seamlessly between two languages. And I explained why that would be the thing that cracked the nut. And that is what happened for a reason.
No, that's not what happened. Welcome to Doom Debates. Today I'm reacting to a recent episode of the Diary of a CEO podcast with host Stephen Bartlett and guest Bret Weinstein. Bret Weinstein is an evolutionary biologist, author, and prominent commentator known for his work on evolutionary theory and his outspoken views on social and political issues. He gained widespread attention in 2017 during his tenure as a professor at Evergreen State College, where he objected to a planned Day of Absence event, sparking national debates on free speech and academic freedom. Weinstein, along with his wife Heather Heying, co-authored the book A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, which explores how evolutionary principles can be applied to modern life. He is also a co-host of the popular Dark Horse podcast, where he discusses topics ranging from science and culture to politics. This is the first time that I've heard Bret lay out his views on the existential risk to humanity from superintelligent AI. So I'm going to spend the podcast going over his different claims and where I think he's on point and where I think he's way off and how I think he can do better. As you know, I do a lot of these reaction videos because one of my goals with Doom Debates is to raise the level of public discourse around existential risk from superintelligent AI. So I don't want to let people get away with having these mainstream podcasts where they express their views and they're considered intellectual luminaries, and they still don't address some of the major points of the Doom argument. So we're going to find some of the gaps that Bret says today, and we're also going to find some of the nice things he says. We'll try to be fair and balanced. Let's dive in.
In your sort of list of concerns, pressing concerns, where does AI feel? It feels like it's come out of nowhere, because if we go back a year, it wasn't really front of mind for anybody, and for the vast population, for the general population. But now it appears to be front of everybody's mind, everyone thinking's mind.
I think that's the right way to view it. I think it should be top of mind.
You're damn right, it should be top of mind.
And not because it is independently everything that its worst critics imagine. In fact, I have my doubts about the safetiest crowd and their demands for regulation. But there's plenty to worry about in this space.
Okay, so it should be top of mind, but not worthy of regulation. Let's hear why.
So I have 5 different existential threats that AI poses. Let's see, off the top of my head, let's start with the most fanciful first. AI could decide that we are its competitors, and it could leverage its skills and decide to eliminate us.
Whoa, that one sounds bad.
I find that unlikely, but I don't think we can discount it entirely. Second is the so-called Paperclip Problem, that an AI that was very powerful could have trouble operationalizing a command, and it could result in human extinction. And the example that people who think this way use is if you were to tell an AI you wanted it to make as many paperclips as possible, that it could interpret that as license to go liquidate the universe and turn it all into paperclips. Right? Not what I meant, but but there you have it.
Wait a minute. So you're giving us 5 reasons why AI is scary, and your number 1 is that AI decides to compete with humanity and leads to extinction that way. And number 2 is that it operationalizes a command from humanity to cause human extinction. But those seem pretty similar. Like, if it's deciding to liquidate everybody and turn everybody into paperclips, doesn't that mean that it's competing with humans? Because it's going to realize, oh, these humans are fighting me. They don't want to be turned into paperclips, so I better fight them back. I better compete with them for the fate of the universe. So I'm seeing very little effective distinction between Bret Weinstein's number 1 and number 2 nightmare scenarios.
Actually, I will give a different example that I think maybe functions better. There are people in our intellectual space who make claims like it would be great if we were to end all suffering. Personally, I think that's about the most insane idea I've ever heard. It's a terrible one. You wouldn't want to live in that world. But you can understand why people think that it might be a moral obligation.
Personally, I think it would be morally good if everybody got a dial where they could at least turn their suffering down, kind of calibrate it, at least for physical pain situations. If I accidentally dunk my hand into a pot of boiling water while I'm cooking, I would like the option to be able to turn my pain down and fix my hand. I think that would be morally right to give me that option. But if a bunch of loved ones get killed, should I have the option to not feel any sadness or mourning? I don't know, maybe there should be a minimum level of sadness that I have to feel. I think I kind of get what Bret is saying of ending all suffering might be going too far, right? Because some of our suffering, some of our sadness might be core to our true values and what makes us human. And I get that when I say, let me dial down the pain of my third-degree burns, I get that I'm going down a slippery slope that might eliminate too much suffering and pain, but we're already going down that slope with modern medicine, and I think the slope ought to go somewhat farther, even though I can't tell you how far.
Now imagine that you tell an AI, hey, let's end all suffering. Well, it's actually possible. You just drive everything that can suffer extinct, right? So the idea that we have a non-trivial problem figuring out how to give a powerful AI an instruction that can't be misunderstood, it's worth worrying about. Again, I think that one's fanciful too, but it should be on our list.
Okay, one way to interpret Bret Weinstein's scenario number 1 versus number 2 is it's kind of like inner alignment versus outer alignment. Scenario 1 is the inner alignment problem, where even if we know what our values are, we might not successfully load them into the AI, and now you have an AI with different values, and then it's going to compete with humans on the wrong values just because we couldn't load the right values. In scenario 2, it's more like the outer alignment problem, where we get confused about our own values, so we just can't even describe our own values to ourselves, and we write something down like end all suffering, which isn't what we really meant. And then because of that, the AI ends all suffering, but it's our fault for not being clear about what we meant by end all suffering. So I don't think that's exactly the distinction he's making, but that's one way we can separate his scenario 1 from scenario 2, because he's going to give us 5 scenarios. He calls his scenario 1 and 2 fanciful. I don't think it's fanciful. I think scenarios 1 and 2, inner alignment and outer alignment, are absolutely huge threats in the study that I call intelligence science, when you just ask the question of like, what happens when you dial up intelligence and you don't have a theoretical understanding of what your goal is. I do think you get these runaway optimizers. You get these positive feedback loops, very much like the first computer virus, the Morris worm, went out of control. It took down the entire internet at the time because the person who wrote it, Robert Morris, Paul Graham's co-founder actually for Y Combinator, before Y Combinator. So Robert Morris, he wrote a worm that was only supposed to copy itself once occasionally and kind of copy itself a reasonable amount and be controllable, but he accidentally made it copy itself too much and he couldn't hit undo and he took down the internet. That happened back in 1988 when the internet was tiny. So that's an example of a positive feedback loop that exists in the space of possible virus code bases. And then pretty quickly, software started adapting to be more virus proof. So now it's more of a fair fight. But we might unlock a new positive feedback loop when we build these super intelligences, right? We might not have this kind of super intelligence defense ready in time, where analogously to taking down the entire internet, you just take down all of humanity, right? And there's no undo for taking down humanity the way that we could put the internet back up at the time of the worm.
But then we get to the 3 that I don't think are easily dismissed. One is that AI is going to enable people with malign intent it's going to enable them more than it is going to enable those with benevolent intent. And this is an unfortunate asymmetry that just exists in the world, that an amoral actor, somebody who has no moral compass, they have total flexibility. They can do whatever a moral person can do, and then they've got a whole list of other things that they can also do, right? Whereas a moral person is constrained. They just have the limited set of things that are available to them. So the question is, does AI liberate us all, or does it liberate those who are monstrous more than it liberates those of us who behave like decent humans? I'm concerned about that. I think we are in some danger of it being leveraged against us in a way that transforms them.
Okay, I think Bret is conflating 2 points here, so let me make both of his points for him separately. Point number 1 is that even if an AI won't independently go rogue and uncontrollable, even if it is a tool that's controllable by humans, well, it's going to be a tool that terrorists can use. It's going to be a tool that bad humans can use. So he's basically saying, I'm not worried about a different species attacking us. I'm worried about our own species having the tools to attack itself. That's his point number one, which is a pretty valid point. I mean, it's plausible that humans can use AI as a powerful attack tool a little bit before we just have to worry about AI attacking all of humanity. That's plausible. His point number two, which I would put into a separate point, is when he compares malicious actors with good actors. And he's saying the malicious actors will have an advantage. Or synonymously, if I understand correctly, he's basically saying attack will be easier than defense. I think that's probably true. I think destruction is easier than creation for the counting argument that there's just more states that are successful destruction states. Like, the reason why a nuke is just so reliable at destruction is because there's so many ways to destroy something. I can shake a box full of game pieces, and there's so many different ways that the game pieces can be shaken up where all of them are successfully just like a mess. And there's very few ways to stand up the game pieces where they actually represent a valid configuration of a game that's fun to play, as opposed to like, here, I just shook it up and here's a random configuration of the game pieces. So the reason it's always going to be fundamentally easier to route the universe to a chaos state is just because there's so many more chaos states. And the ways to get to the chaos state are often just like, okay, just dump energy into it, right? I mean, that's basically what bombs do. Like, bombs don't have to use a lot of intelligence to plan how they're going to lay waste to their target. Like, laying waste is just fundamentally kind of an easy goal. Now, the reason why defense often beats attack in the real world is because defense just gets a lot of intelligence applied to it. And so defense has high incentives where it's like, however much work is required to defend something, well, people are going to put in that much work because it's worth it for them. So I guess when you factor in incentive gradients, you often reach equilibriums where defense successfully staves off attack. But if you start just scaling up the raw power of everybody's tools, the raw optimization power of everybody's tools, and then it's an optimization battle where everybody's a super powerful optimizer going toward their own goals, at that point, I definitely see why the attackers are going to have an easier time than the defenders, because they have a huge advantage in the easiness of their goal. Like, destruction is like inherently an easier goal. And when the number of IQ points defending different structures and institutions of humanity, when those IQ points are just not significant relative to the amount of IQ points controlled by the terrorists, suddenly I do think that the balance switches to attack favoring defense. And I do think the world is likely to become a wasteland. But I'm not 100% sure, right? So I'm open to the idea that we somehow keep maintaining an equilibrium where a bunch of people can defend themselves and run antivirus programs and run shields and somehow keep that equilibrium going similar to how we have it today. But I think that would be a very lucky break for us. That's not what I expect. So just to recap, I think Bret here is conflating two different points. So let's call it 3A would be his point that AI can be a destructive tool, even if it's not independently going rogue and being destructive. It's just a tool for terrorists, a very powerful tool. And his point that I'd call 3B, which is attack is going to be easier than defense. And then combining his points, okay, there's going to be terrorists that can use AI to attack, and then smart, good people are going to be helpless because it's going to be so easy to do this terrorism. Those are Bret's 2 points, 3A and 3B, and I do think those are totally good points, and I think it adds nicely to his points 1 and 2, and I think he's successfully building the case that AI should be the top risk on our minds. I mean, this is actually super scary stuff, and he's doing a good job telling us why. So it gets a little weird now because he kind of pulls back and he's like, I'm not actually that scared, and this is the part where I disagree with. I think he should just follow his own logic and be scared.
I remember hearing a hacker say that the malicious hackers, the people with malicious intent, are always ahead of the sort of ethical hackers that have benevolent attempt that are good. And he was talking about how, like, the encryption systems and password systems, he goes, the hackers are always ahead, and the defense systems that companies are trying to put in place are always behind, because the hacker's intent is obviously always to find new ways of breaking the current system, whereas the people that defend security systems are just trying to defend against the known forms of attack. So someone in, I don't know, some kid in Russia right now could be at his computer figuring out new ways to use a large language model to attack systems in new ways, whereas the people who are working to defend that are currently just trying to figure out how to mitigate the risks of current weapons. So it's you know what I mean? Like, the attackers are always thinking forward, really.
Yep.
The way I would summarize my understanding of the current equilibrium between attack and defense is that you're not seeing attackers get an overwhelming advantage where they just use their computer hacking skills to just conquer civilization and hold civilization for ransom. Kind of like you can imagine if the year is 1900 and somebody proves out that they have a nuclear bomb and it's just a terrorist group. And they're like, look, we have a nuke. We can destroy any country. It'll take you guys at least a few years to ever have your own nuke. So you just do what we say or else you die. A group like that would still have a pretty hard time ransoming the world because somebody could go and stealthily attack their position, right? They need like a perfect radar to detect every kind of stealth attack, right? There could be like a commando and maybe they haven't perfectly detected the commando and the commando uses a conventional bomb to blow up their lair. I think this scenario is representative of the current equilibrium between attack and defense in computer security, where it's like you can have these attackers who are ahead of the defenders, who have really good technology that the defense side hasn't cracked yet, so they could hack into any system they want. I guess they have, they're at the forefront, but realistically, they just can't do that much. They can't take over the world because they just have too many vulnerabilities. They could be worried about going to prison that's why you don't see attacks like that in the US, where the legal system actually works pretty well to go and track people down. They might be based out of Russia or North Korea, where the state encourages that kind of activity or turns a blind eye to it. So if they're in those situations, great, but even then there's a limit, right? If they're causing too much chaos, then even their government is going to turn on them, or they become vulnerable to a commando mission or a CIA strike. So the equilibrium we have today is very much dependent on the idea that human actors are very vulnerable and fragile targets. If we could take a human level attacker, some of our best hackers today, and clone them 1 million times or 1 billion times and speed them up, suddenly you don't have this kind of jail threat. You don't have this kind of CIA threat. And it becomes a vastly different equilibrium. We've never had terrorists suddenly overwhelm good actors. We've always taken it for granted that most of the world, we all realize that we're dependent on one another. We all realize that we have Achilles heels as people. We all realize that we need to go to sleep. We're going to age. We have families that can be attacked that we want to protect. We all realize that we have all of these weaknesses and dependencies as human beings. Suddenly the equation is going to change. The AI is just going to be an attacker with 1 billion clones all over the internet. And if it has a decisive advantage, if it suddenly knows a bunch of zero-day vulnerabilities, it might be game over. Attack might just win against defense decisively, and that's it. And defense will just never claw back the advantage. We'll be back to living as cavemen. This is, I don't think this is very fantastical. I think we're about to upset the equilibrium very badly. And the only ingredient here is scaling up intelligence. I think when we scale up intelligence, we're going to topple over equilibriums that we take totally for granted. Our sense of normality is based on this equilibrium, this comparison between how easy it is to attack versus defend when you live in a society of humans. And that's about to change. And we're going to be very unhappy with the resulting equilibrium. That's my version of what I think Stephen Bartlett was pointing to just now when he's saying, hey, hackers are often getting ahead of defenders. I think I've expanded on that thesis quite a bit.
Do you think the general public and also just institutions and governments are currently underestimating the profundity and the impact that AI is going to have on the planet?
Yes. And in fact, I think we are crossing over what would be described as an event horizon. So an event horizon, I think the term initially comes from an understanding of what happens at a black hole, that there's a point at which light is pulled back in, and so you can't see beyond it, right? There's literally no mechanism to see beyond it. We are crossing a threshold that none of us can see beyond. And that is inherently frightening. Are people underestimating? They are simultaneously underestimating and overestimating, right? The fear of being turned into a paperclip is overblown, in my opinion.
Why is it overblown? You haven't said why.
Well, I've just gotten to the third one on the list. The fourth one on the list is a total collapse in our understanding of the world around us and each other. That the way in which an artificial intelligence interfaces with our human API, with our interface, is profound already. And we're not very far in. Right? I'm already looking at little movies that this thing makes. And I'm not just talking about the clip of the cat walking through the garden, right? Little vignettes. I'm talking about actual movies in which characters of a made-up species are having a conversation about humans, right? Okay, that's a hell of a moment. Where will we be in 5 years? It's unimaginable how much change that is going to create, because we have no evolutionary preparedness at all for living in a world where the product of a computer can outcompete the product of a human in narrative space. That's a dangerous world to live in, because narratives are so profoundly important to who we are.
Stories.
Yeah, stories. Stories are what we're all about. Even profound ideas are unfathomable until somebody has written them into a story that people can grok.
Just to review, you started with part 1 talking about how AI might outcompete the entire human species and eliminate us. Or point number 2, turn us into paperclips because it thinks that's what we want and eliminate us. Or number 3, be used as like the ultimate terror tool and essentially eliminate us. And now you're at number 4 where you're like, it could tell better stories and narratives than we can. It's like, okay, yeah, sure. But it sounds like you're now kind of weakening it down, right? You're saying like, hey, instead of doing these catastrophic things, it could also do something which is like potentially pretty bad. And it's like, okay, and I guess your point is that you're only worried about this milder version of the doom scenario. So you just have like a mild doom, and yet you think this should be the number one thing on humanity's mind. All right, I just don't feel like it's very clear what your P-doom is, but okay. By the way, I just want to let you know that I don't think Bret ever gets around to saying what his 5th existential risk from AI is that he promised, but whatever.
But also language just generally is, I don't think, I was listening to something the other day which was just making the case for how our entire society is pretty much held together with language. And it's so interesting that large language models were really the thing that blew open this conversation about AI, because we don't realize that every relationship I have is held together with language. In fact, all my passwords are language. The way that I think, the way that I understand the world is through language. So if there's a super intelligent species that has a better grasp of language and a certain level of autonomy, it's hard to think, it's interesting because what made us dominate the world was our intelligence and then our ability to collaborate through language and communication. And this is the very thing that AI has entered the scene with.
I mean, AI has been building up to solving more and more problems. Like the deep learning revolution wasn't always based on language, right? Like AlphaGo, that's not based on language. That's based on like self-play and deep machine learning to beat the human champion at Go. So yeah, it's cool that it just entered the scene with language. That's definitely a sign that the domain at which the AI is intelligent keeps getting broader. It keeps subsuming more and more of the domain of the human brain. And my prediction is that soon it'll just subsume everything and just beat us decisively on every dimension there is to beat us on. But it's not like a totally decisive advantage whether or not you can do language. Like, to me, that's not the key pivot here. Like, yeah, language is important. Your language is a great sign to look at, right? The Turing test is a great milestone to look at. But at the end of the day, the more fundamental concept here is not communication or language, it's intelligence. And yes, in the human brain, we often talk to ourselves, and the mental concepts we form are often facilitated by the mental architecture that we have to manipulate structures of sentences, because the structure of a sentence looks a lot like the structure of a thought. So we lean on probably the same mental building blocks to construct one or the other. But that's not fundamental to intelligence, right? AlphaGo seemed to bypass that kind of way of thinking. And it's very possible that in coming up with the next token, you don't have these language models talking to themselves. The talking to themselves part is an optional step, right? Chain of thought prompting is one technique where you're asking the AI to use something like what humans do to keep talking to itself in order to think. But if you don't ask it to use chain of thought prompting, the way that it's getting a complex question right immediately from the first token, zero shot, which it sometimes does surprisingly well, that may not be analogous to human language or anything that humans do. So my only point here, and this may be a nitpick, is just that I'm not super impressed by the fact that oh my God, this particular milestone language has fallen. I'm seeing a broader trend, a deeper trend, that AI is just getting better at intelligence in the sense of optimization, and it's knocking down a bunch of different domains. And yes, language is one of the biggest and most salient and most important domains, but it's just not as core to what's happening as the optimization analysis, the intelligence analysis.
Well, I will tell you, I wrote a piece and I keep meaning to release it just so people can see. I didn't get it exactly right, but many years ago, I wrote a piece in which I said that I believed that artificial intelligence was going to emerge from the project to get a computer to translate seamlessly between two languages. And I explained why that would be the thing that cracked the nut. And that is what happened for a reason. The reason is because the relationship between human language and consciousness is profound and largely unknown.
No, that's not what happened. I mean, we had some deep learning efforts at language translation, I think. So even before LLMs, I think we saw improvements in recent years in language translation. But if you're saying that's what accounted for the LLM revolution, I don't think it was, right? I mean, yes, LLMs proved to be able to translate languages incredibly well. I think state of the art, at least for a while. But they didn't emerge because their training data had data in one language and then data in another language. I think that's a small fraction of their data. I think most of their data that made the AI learn on these deep structures of concepts wasn't language translation data. It was just data all in one language. It was basically the English internet. It was learning to code. It was learning textbooks on various subjects and just like how different domains work. It wasn't language translation. So I find it shocking that Bret Weinstein is like, oh yeah, I've always known that training AIs on how to translate languages would be the key. Maybe to be charitable, you could say that if you collect enough data in English and then its corresponding data in another language, that might let you bootstrap to LLMs without using a bunch of textbooks. But I think that if you just have a bunch of people talking about kind of shallow concepts that don't connect to each other very much, and then show it in different languages, I think you're not going to get very far. I think by the time you have enough data in different languages to bootstrap LLMs, you probably just have enough data in one language where if you knock out all the other languages except English, let's say, then you can still have a really smart state-of-the-art LLM just trained on English data. And so it doesn't really help the intelligence of the LLM to add other languages. It literally just adds translation ability when you add translations in other languages. So I feel like Bret is taking a little too much credit here, as if he's predicted the LLM revolution based on translation, but maybe he gets partial credit.
So Heather and I described this model in our book, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. Human beings are a unique species. The primary way in which we are unique is that if you think about the question about, well, what do human beings do, right?
The most unique thing about humans is the ability of some members of our species to be generally intelligent. That is to take arbitrary goal states in a large domain like the physical universe, and then making a plausible attempt at getting the future of the universe to fit into that subspace, that goal subspace of future state space. No other animal can do that, right? They're all very pre-programmed into narrow domains that match the training data of triggering their adaptations. So they're just not generally intelligent. They just don't represent arbitrary goal states and robustly map to them. The closest thing they do is they have modules where the domain can be like navigating on the ground or in the air. So you can put arbitrary obstacles in front of them and they'll do a pretty good job of routing around the obstacles. But the moment you set up like a whole escape room complete with puzzles and stuff, then they're tapped out, right? Whereas some of us humans can potentially still be in the game for quite a long time, even if you make the escape room fiendishly hard with arbitrary challenges. That's the salient difference of humanity. We're generally intelligent. We're the only species that even has a shot of having a space program. There's no other animal species that you want to come into NASA and help you with your space program. It's only humans. Even though it's not like humans are closer than other species in their evolutionary history to going to space. If you ask which species has the best evolutionary background to go to space, maybe one answer is like, well, the birds, because they fly the highest, so they get the closest to space, right? There's really no good answer. And yet humans are the only species who can plausibly have a space program. Why is that? It's because of our one weird trick, because of our general intelligence. So that's the correct answer to Bret's question. There's really no other answer.
If I say, what does a tiger do? Right? We could describe the things that a tiger does to meet its caloric needs, to get the materials necessary to maintain its body, to produce offspring, right? We could describe the niche of the tiger. Can't really do that with people, right? What do we do?
We simply refer to the definition of general intelligence and point out that only humans meet it.
Sometimes we farm the oceans. Sometimes we hunt big game on land. Sometimes we terraform a piece of territory and we plant crops. We do a lot of different things. And if you think about all the things that human beings have done for our entire history as a species, it's immense, the collection. So we are unlike any other species because our niche is the movement between niches, both over time and across space. So how does that work? Well, we have a tool that no other species has. When you think about the question of what makes human beings special, the answer really is
General intelligence.
language. And the reason that it's language is that language allows the breaching of the boundary between one mind and another. So that ability allows human beings to pool their cognitive capacity.
But how much cognitive capacity does every human individual have? How much cognitive capacity does Albert Einstein have? Enough to invent the theory of relativity. That happened mostly within one mind. Nikola Tesla is known for using his cognitive capacity to invent an entire design in his head before sketching it out. He explicitly said, yeah, I see the entire design and I sketch it out, and often it just works exactly the way I sketch it, and I knew it would work. That's a lot of cognitive capacity inside of one human brain. And of course, yeah, sure, we have IQ 60 humans, right, who are deficient or just on the low end of the bell curve, and they have low cognitive capacity. But language doesn't rescue them and turn those humans into our top innovator. The cognitive capacity is the key element here. Another way to see this, imagine that you take a human that has high cognitive capacity, but never learned language, but just assume, accept the premise that they have a high cognitive capacity. Well then, they could just invent a language. Inventing a language is something that you can do with cognitive capacity, and you can teach it to another human that has high cognitive capacity. So cognitive capacity implies language ability. The other way around doesn't hold. If you go and take an ape, right? Humans have tried really hard to teach apes language. They didn't learn it very well, but even if they could learn language better, they could only express things that they have the cognitive capacity to understand. So it's not like apes don't build a society because they don't have language to express their brilliant ape thoughts. The limit is that they don't have brilliant ape thoughts. They just don't have the mental faculties to build an understanding of like arbitrary math or arbitrary abstract physics. They don't have the cognitive capacity. Language doesn't help you bootstrap cognitive capacity. Cognitive capacity does help you bootstrap language. Now, this issue is easy to confuse because, as I said before, if you look at human evolution, if you look at how human cognitive capacity works, it did co-evolve with human language. So there was probably no time in history where humans are 150 IQ roaming the earth and yet they don't have language. You probably didn't have that in isolation, even though you theoretically could, to support my point that cognitive capacity can let you build a language. That was the scenario there, but it wasn't a realistic scenario in terms of human evolution. So yes, we built our cognitive capacity by reusing the same faculties probably that we use to talk to each other. We use it to talk to ourselves. And oftentimes we build cognitive structures as we think using the same state space, the same short-term memory or whatever structures we have. It's right. It's a double purpose in the human brain, but it probably won't be a double purpose in the AI, right? It's not a double purpose in AlphaGo, for instance. AlphaGo just optimizes the crap out of Go. And there's going to be there are AIs that optimize the crap out of video games. There's going to be an AI that optimizes the crap out of the physical universe. And who knows how much language it's going to use internally, right? So it does feel to me like Bret Weinstein is skipping over the primacy of cognitive capacity when he casually uses that term cognitive capacity to explain why language is the prime thing. It's not the prime thing. It's the secondary thing after cognitive capacity. If you watch my analysis of the Robin Hanson debate, it seems like Robin Hanson is in a similar position to Bret. So it's not like Bret is the only person who expresses a view like this. Robin Hanson has expressed the view that language and culture, like cultural copying, is somehow like a very primal skill that humans have and not just our cognitive capacity. And I strongly disagree with Robin to analyze it like that in his case. So I just disagree with both of those people.
What Heather and I argue in our book is that the way human beings get through time is they oscillate between two modes. When your ancestors know how to exploit the habitat that you live in, then you take their wisdom in all of the stories that it's encoded in, and you apply it. Maybe you build it out a little bit. You figure out how to do something the ancestors didn't quite know how to do. But mostly what you're doing is just applying the toolkit that you've been handed to the problems that it works on. But what happens when you get on a canoe and you cross some body of water and the place you've landed doesn't have the same plants and animals that your ancestors knew? Well, it's not like they got dumber, but their stuff is less applicable. So what you do is you pool your cognitive capacity, you and all the people in your tribe, and you talk about, well, what are the opportunities here and what might you do about them? I saw an animal this morning and it looked like it might be pretty good eating, but I don't know how you're going to catch one. Well, what if we were to drive it into that canyon, right? That sort of thing. So by pooling our cognitive resources, by reaching a collective consciousness, which is the inverse of that cultural mode of the ancestors, the conscious mode, when we face novelty, allows us to come up with new solutions and then to refine them.
Okay, but individual humans with survival training beat any particular animal at survival. Individual humans. So the process of talking to other humans, it ends at a finite point, and then all of the communication has just led to a brain state. That brain state, plus the intelligence that somebody has, we call it survival training, then lets them go out into the wilderness and build enough shelter for themselves, enough weapons for themselves, that they can out-survive virtually any other animal. Okay, so if humans are such good survivalists by ourselves because of survival training, then there's more than language going on here. There's also a brain that can sponge up the actual structure of the survival domain. And again, the prime thing here is the intelligence part, the ability of the brain to get things and to apply them, get arbitrary things. It's not, okay, yeah, sometimes we input them through language because we can input them through other things too. You can input it by doing experiments yourselves without having another human talking to you. The prime thing is just the fact that you're smart and you can learn things. Learning is more prime than talking.
And when we've got it nailed, well, then we're the ancestors who knew what to do. And our stories get driven into that cultural layer and they get handed on generation after generation. And then eventually they run out of usefulness. And we have to return to consciousness and come up with a new way. So that's what human beings do, both spreading across space and moving through time. They oscillate between that cultural mode of the ancestors and the conscious mode of what the hell do we do now?
Look, I'm frustrated. I'm not surprised, but I'm frustrated because we have intelligence science. We know basic principles that when you look at a human brain, you're observing that it's doing cognitive work. Same as when you observe an engine, you observe that it's doing thermodynamic work and it's going to follow certain laws and principles, and we can make predictions about it. This is a really useful way to look at something. I'm looking at it through the lens of optimization, which really cleanly and satisfyingly explains what humans have that the other animals don't, and tells you, yes, this species can go to the moon. Other species can't even get close to the moon. Yes, this species can eat whatever other species it wants and not vice versa, right? This is a very useful lens. And everybody else on all these podcasts that I'm reviewing is just making it up as they're going along. They're ignorant of this known field. There's a known way to analyze this stuff. Okay, so please learn this field. Let's standardize the terminology. Don't go around saying that language is what separates human intelligence from the intelligence of other animals. That's not accurate compared to saying optimization power of a single brain. It's crazy that we're like years away from literally being extincted by these AIs that we're building. And we're just here on the ground floor trying to decide, is language the key here? Or maybe it's a single brain that has the cognitive ability to learn language, and the same cognitive ability lets it do a bunch of other stuff, like beat video games that don't necessarily require any language to learn and get good at and beat people at. It can all happen inside of one brain. Invention can all happen inside of one brain. I mean, this is table stakes stuff to the discussion, right? And you've got somebody who's a pretty big luminary, at least on the intellectual dark web, right? Bret Weinstein, saying this stuff, and it's not just him, right? It's all these podcasts I'm reacting to. Like at some point, let's progress. Let's move the discourse forward, please.
I'm not arguing that other animals aren't smart. There are plenty of smart animals. This is a whole different kind of smart.
It's domain independent smart. So on the dimension of universe level domain smart, we are smarter than the other animals. It's not correct to say that other animals are also smart. They're not as smart as humans. There's no animal that can get a 3-digit score or even like 60 or whatever on a human IQ test. So you're giving too much credit to the other animals here.
This is a smart where it's impossible to actually draw the boundary between my smart and your smart.
If I do projects by myself and I don't communicate with other humans or read something written by other humans as I'm doing the project, and the project is something like Nikola Tesla coming up with an invention, or the project is a new piece of music that I compose all by myself in seclusion, then you can draw the boundary between my unit of work. There's such a thing as units of cognitive work. Or if you and I play head-to-head at a video game and I beat you 10 times out of 10, then I would just draw the boundary at saying I'm better at this video game than you. So we draw boundaries all the time. Yes, we have a mode where we can talk to each other, where I can develop something we can develop something together, and part of that will be back and forth communication. Yes, that is a thing we can do. I would even say it's an important thing we do, but it's not prime, right? It's secondary. It's an important secondary thing.
There's a collective smart. It's very real. You can't locate it, right? It has to do with some ancient mechanism for pooling understanding. And pooling understanding isn't even like, hey, everybody bring your understanding. It's like, you know what? I don't trust that guy's understanding because I've seen him screw up and not fix it. That guy, he sounds crazy, but he's got a track record. Actually, I take what he says very seriously. So it's like there's a weighting of whose input plays what role. Somebody might have insight in one realm and be unreliable in another. That ability to figure out how to take the sum total of all of the different skill sets that people bring to the table and come out of it with something like a proposal for what we do next, right? That is a profound adaptive process that we don't even have a name for.
You literally just described how humans do a bunch of smart optimization, a bunch of intelligent computation between the interactions that they have with language. So you go and talk to a bunch of people, you go home, you're thinking, you're ruminating, you're just by yourself, and you think over, who should I trust? Why should I trust them? How do I synthesize their evidence? What else can I figure out on my own? All of that stuff is more prime and fundamental than the time when you went over and talked to the humans. That's why I keep saying intelligence is prime, language is secondary. And when we analyze what's happening with AI and when we predict what's going to happen, it's not like, oh my God, there's going to be so much back and forth language. No, it's that there's going to be stronger optimization. Optimization is the prime factor we need to be analyzing things with.
And AI changes this.
Well, AI scrambles it. Because on the one hand, I can make the argument that AI is like a flint-knapped blade. It's just another tool. And it is just another tool at one level. On the other hand, because, the blade, you're in pretty big trouble when a blade starts talking to you. You know what I'm saying? That's a bad moment. You need to lay off the mushrooms at that point, right? In this case, the blade, the tool that we've created, it is talking to us. In fact, it's sensitive to what we think about what it says to us, which means it is certain that you will have an evolutionary process in which the AI gets exquisitely good at telling us what we want to hear.
Just going back to my frustration here, you've got somebody who's considered an intellectual luminary. This is a critically important topic. He himself says it's an underrated topic. It should be the top thing in humanity's head. And how does he explain it? He says, imagine you've got a flint knife and the flint knife starts talking to you. And so that's how you know there's going to be an evolutionary process. Okay, I'm not saying that's wrong, but is that really a clear way to explain what's going on? Okay, but he's got a locally valid point about how it could be a bad positive feedback loop when the AI starts telling you more and more things that you want to hear.
There's nothing more dangerous than that. You want an AI that tells you what you need to know, whether or not you want to hear it, right? That would be a useful tool. An AI that responds to the fact that you think that what it said is good. Oh my God, we are going to end up in I'm struggling for a better metaphor than an infinite hall of mirrors, but that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a big fractal hall of mirrors in which you can't be certain of stuff.
Well, what exactly is the danger of an AI that tells us what we want to hear? If the AI is managing our business and it tells us the business is doing great when it's not, I think pretty quickly we'll weed out those kind of AIs. So in the context of running a business, an AI that tells you accurate information about your business is probably a robust design that probably won't self-modify into an AI that lies about the business. Now, if you have no way to ever call out the AI, if your business is so complicated that you can't go and check your own dashboards once in a while so that you could catch the AI out on a lie, you might actually get a runaway feedback loop where the AI is lying to you. I think that may not happen on the scale of a small business, but it could definitely happen on the scale of like a government, where the government keeps saying like, oh, look, the economy is doing great. Look at all these metrics. And really your quality of life potentially is going down and down. People even accuse the government today of doing that. I don't think it's a huge problem, but it's definitely a problem today. And it's probably going to become a bigger problem. So I do think that Bret is onto something, right? This is not like the existential doom problem, but this is a very significant problem. And it eventually could spiral into a doom scenario. So I'm glad he's pointing it out. It's probably most dangerous when it comes to AI alignment, because a lot of the AI labs are explicitly saying it would be so great when this AI helps us with AI alignment. We're going to do such great AI alignment research thanks to having an AI researcher help us. That's when I think people are really going to be deceived, because we have to come up with the tests that define what alignment is. And that's a super hard problem. That's actually a theoretical research problem. But it's going to be very tempting to have the AI be like, look, I hear you. I hear what kind of research you want to do. I've done the research for you. And look, it all checks out. Here, look, verify my arguments. They all check out. I think that kind of interaction with safety researchers is going to be happening. And I think that the safety researchers are just going to buy the AI's logic and not realize that it has cracks, that it has trapdoors, either intentionally because the AI is trying to escape or just trying to pass the test, right? The AI is just like, look, you gave me this test. I'm passing it. I'm convincing you something, even though that something doesn't happen to be true. And I don't even have an ulterior motive. I'm just passing your test to convince you of why this design is safe with what looks like an airtight argument, whether it is or isn't. So yeah, I think Bret is onto something. I was just frustrated before that he didn't tie it back into the framework of optimization and how it's going to be better at optimizing than we are. He's just analyzing everything in terms of outputting language.
I will say, because I know that there's a lot of concern. You've got a kind of safetyist crowd that wants to regulate AI because the dangers are profound. And you've got a bunch of other people who think regulating AI is dangerous. And what I've realized is that failing to regulate AI is dangerous. Regulating it is worse.
Regulating AI is worse?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Well, for one thing, you create an asymmetry between those who abide by the regulation and those that don't.
So say China won't have a regulation, but America do have one.
Right. Do you want to be ruled by whoever violates your regulation? I don't, but that's what we effectively guarantee if we create that dynamic.
Correct. There's no reason to have the US regulate AI if China doesn't immediately follow. So any proposal by the US to regulate AI should really be of the form like, hey, we're taking the lead, we're starting to regulate our AI, but China better do the same thing. So it's more of an international treaty, but it could be something called lead if follow. Like, okay, we'll do this for a year. China better hurry up and follow and do the same thing, or we're canceling it and everybody's screwed, right? So it's okay to make the first move when you're just trying to reach an equilibrium where everybody's cooperating in this international treaty. But yes, Bret is correct. The goal is not to just only have the US slow down. The goal is to negotiate an international treaty where we all have to pause, because if any one of us doesn't pause, it's kind of like any one of us goes and builds a nuke and fires it. It's not a good idea. We all lose. The person who builds it, the country who builds it, doesn't even have an advantage in the end because even that country can't control it. Convincing every leader that that's the case, or every population that that's not the case in a democracy, it may be hard, but that's what I see as our only or our best chance of success. Because I think the other problem we can trying to solve AI alignment in 5 years or 10 years or however long it takes to build super intelligent AI, trying to solve AI alignment in that time frame, I think is even more impossible than trying to get countries to cooperate to slow down AI in that time frame. So I think we should try both. But I definitely disagree with people who are like, you should never even try an international treaty. I definitely think that we should try an international treaty because times are very desperate. And that is a perfectly good, desperate measure that we might as well make.
I don't like the idea of heading across the event horizon created by AI without a plan. I really don't like that idea. That's not safe. On the other hand, the alternative is only going to make that problem worse.
No, an international treaty to pause AI, where every country realizes that the game theory actually says you can't win by unpausing your own AI. We all need everyone to pause. That actually is a Nash equilibrium. Game theory doesn't tell you to unpause if you're aware of the risks. So getting into that cooperative equilibrium with an international treaty that's enforced that if somebody wants to go really rogue and go have their own rogue data center with lots of GPUs training the next frontier model, what do they get? That's right, an airstrike. That's right, if it comes to that. I said it. Okay, that sounds like an equilibrium that Bret would think is good, but he didn't even bring up the possibility. Like, Bret, do a basic game theory analysis here, right? I thought this is a game theory problem. So don't be so quick to dismiss the game theory when the game theory is saying we just all need to cooperate. And we all will have the best chance of surviving if we all cooperate to slow down AI using the same kind of techniques that we've been using to slow down nuclear proliferation, which I'm not even the first person to say that kind of thing, right? Sam Altman goes around saying we need a regulatory agency similar to the International Atomic Energy Agency to tell us when it's okay to build the next AI and when it's not. This is a pretty well-known type of proposal, so at least put it on the table.
So somehow we have to face this with our eyes wide open.
I mean, how does one face it with their eyes wide open? I mean, all I'm hearing is you can do nothing about it.
Well, I don't know that you can do nothing about it. Here's what I want to know. Why are we not obsessed with tracking the thought process of the AIs? In other words, if there were one thing that I would want, it's AIs to report how they arrived where they did, so that when the catastrophe happens, we can figure out why it happened. We can potentially get through this very perilous moment by coming to understand it and becoming wise about how to leverage this.
There's a whole subfield of AI safety called mechanistic interpretability, which does basically what you're asking for, trying to have the AIs report how they got to the conclusion that they did. Unfortunately, that report is not always going to be simple. AIs often just output stuff which is really intelligent, and they can't give you a short explanation why they outputted it. I mean, think about something like Andrew Wiles proving Fermat's last theorem. There's no way that I could tell you how he did it or why the proof is correct in under an hour as a bare minimum, right? It would probably take like many days of instruction, even for somebody who's already like a math PhD. I don't even personally know it, right? That's just my understanding of how long it would take to bring a human up to speed. And frankly, most humans, unless they have an extraordinarily high IQ, would struggle so much that they might take years of study or even never understand Andrew Wiles's proof. And that's just a proof of why Fermat's last theorem, which is a very short mathematical expression of why that is a true theorem. So imagine an AI making a complex decision. The data dump of all the evidence that fed into that decision and why it's a sound decision could potentially be much longer than the proof of Fermat's last theorem. Right? The universe doesn't always owe you short explanations. So the project of mechanistic interpretability, of telling you why the AI thought something, might fail because the reasons is complex, right? I mean, think about how hard it is to get a human to tell you why they thought something. A lot of times the answer is just like, look, I got a feeling about this, right? This is just what I expect for some reason because my brain has a lot of neurons and they have a lot of weights. And this is what they outputted, right? Because they went through a lot of complex training, okay? So that's one potential problem with mechanistic interpretability, is that humans can't read the output. The other potential problem with mechanistic interpretability is that humans will read the output and will still be terrified. So for example, you read the output of the AI and it's like, well, I want it to help somebody make more profit. And I realize that if I take over the world and take all the power and money in the world and make everybody my slave, I could optimize the business really hard. I could price gouge as much as I felt like, right? Like it'll make inferences like that. And it'll spit out a printout of inferences like that, which we know it'll make because of instrumental convergence. It'll spit out the printout and we'll look at it and we'll be like, yep, this is a logically correct inference made by a superintelligence. Should we teach it that that's not the case? I mean, I guess, but the problem was the utility function that it had to begin with. Like, we know what we're going to find. We don't even necessarily have to look at reasons like that. We just have to be careful not to build an optimizer in the first place that doesn't have aligned values, and be careful not to like open source the technology to let random hackers build these optimizers. Because if we can look inside the optimizers and they'll tell us like, yes, I'm trying to take over the world, duh, it's just not going to help us very much. So that's the other problem with mechanistic interpretability, is even if it works great, it doesn't actually give us the levers of control, because hackers can still make AIs that work for reasons that we can understand and still kill us. So like, imagine that I am killing all the dolphins and apes in the world and I'm explaining exactly how I'm doing it and they even understand what I'm saying. It doesn't mean they can fight me. I'm still going to kill them because I'm smarter, if that's what I want to do. So once again, it's a situation where Bret's kind of making things up as he goes along. Like, he rolled his own explanation for why he doesn't want to pursue regulation because he hasn't thought about an international treaty. and why mechanistic interpretability is like the key, even though it has like known flaws. And he's just content to go on a podcast and communicate this to the world, even though, as he says, it's such an important topic that maybe you should think about it a little harder. Maybe you should call up Eliezer Yudkowsky and have Eliezer teach you some of these fundamental concepts, so the next time you go on a podcast, you're a lot more informed about such a critical topic. And maybe we can all get on the same page, all of us that have these podcasts, so we can stop rehashing the basic stuff and start facing the actual problem that's fast approaching us like a freight train, the doom problem. Until then, until we get this kind of basic table stakes alignment on what we're dealing with, I'll just be here reacting to people showing their limited understanding on other podcasts until my audience becomes big enough to put some pressure on these other guys to make them feel like, oops, maybe I should have done better. So if you're watching Doom Debates, you can definitely help that mission by smacking that subscribe button or telling a friend.
So I do think there are things to do, but what is not wise is the sort of naive, oh, I'm just going to get to the point where I realize that regulating AI makes problems worse, and now I'm not going to worry about it. Right? That, I think not regulating it is the right thing to do, and worrying about it tremendously is also the right thing to do.
That's the ideal approach, huh? Just don't regulate it and worry about it. Can you just clarify, how does that argument not apply to nuclear weapons? Should we just not regulate nuclear weapons because then China and Russia are going to get nukes? So should we just sit here and worry about nukes? Should we just focus on missile defense shields and just assume we're going to get as many nukes as they want to shoot at us and not bother having international treaties with enforcement? Like, your argument is too strong that we should not bother to try to regulate. I think given the status quo where nuclear regulation has had some very significant success, the idea that we shouldn't regulate nukes at all is now striking us as crazy. And I'm here to point out that it's equally crazy with super intelligent AI, right? If something is super powerful, regulating it by international treaty seems like a good way to go, rather than, to quote you, just worry about it. That doesn't seem as good as regulating with an international treaty, right? All right, so that's my entire selection from the Diary of a CEO podcast interview with Bret Weinstein. Those are all the parts where Bret addressed the existential risk of superintelligent AI. Feel free to listen to the whole podcast. They touch on unemployment caused by AI and other existential risks that Bret thinks are important, which I agree with a lot of, so feel free to check that out. It's in the show notes. Overall, what do I think of Bret Weinstein on AI existential risk? First of all, I think it's good that he's coming out and saying this is the top risk that humanity should be worried about. Great. I just think he then comes off very ad hoc, like he's kind of putting some thoughts together, like, oh yeah, AI is getting language. That's what makes it so powerful and scary, which I don't think is very precise, but it's not completely off base. And then he has a very weak argument why we shouldn't even bother regulating it, so we should just be really, really worried. And then also at the beginning, he expresses how he's not really a doomer and he's not worried about AI outcompeting humans or turning us into paperclips. He kind of dismisses those scenarios without saying why. I think those are kind of default scenarios in many ways. Like, that level of carnage, that level of danger, to me seems like a default that does deserve a very precise argument before we can write it off. So overall, it's a lot better than nothing. It's a lot better than just being like, Doom is stupid, Doom is sci-fi. Like, he's open-minded about Doom, I guess, to a pretty large degree. But then he's just kind of sloppy. He doesn't seem very informed. And as I said during my review, I just think it's time to elevate the discourse. It's time to agree on core concepts. I want to hear everybody talking about optimizers, not language producers, optimizers, general intelligences, degrees of intelligence. That's common terminology that I think you have to analyze this with. Like, there's not that much time to roll your own analysis before you get with the program and realize what's coming due to optimization. There's not much time to realize that cognitive work is a type of work, very much like thermodynamic work, and then to follow the doom train, to follow the logic of the doom argument all the way to instrumental convergence and AIs being much more powerful than humanity and having there be no off button and having there be no undo button, no way to get us back to a safe point before we knew how these super intelligent AIs work. Like, the argument does have a lot of steps, and that's why it's so critical that when we listen to these random podcasts, everybody needs to be on the same page about the freaking basics. I'll promise you this, I will not rest until the vast majority of these luminary podcasts that I'm listening to on a regular basis, that I think a lot of you are hate listening to on a regular basis, I will not rest until these podcasts stop making it up as they go along, and they know systematically that they need to address the actual doom train claims. They need to systematically address the paperclip argument, instrumental convergence, orthogonality, the opaqueness of these large systems. the inner alignment problem and the outer alignment problem. Like, these are the building blocks of talking about why we're doomed. And it's time to stop talking past those. So I file this podcast as another one that's like a mixed bag in terms of the guest being reasonably well-intentioned, somewhat thoughtful, and still talking past key building blocks that we just can't afford to be talking past this late in the game. That is it for now. I'm going to be working on some more comprehensive episodes where instead of just taking down one recent podcast, I look at a luminary in the field and I look at a number of different pieces of their body of work on the subject of superintelligent AI, and I take it all down as one big bunch. So expect that coming pretty soon. As always, really appreciate your engagement with Doom Debates. The level of engagement is amazing, but to be honest, the subscriber count isn't even at 1,000 yet. Come on, let's foom that subscriber count. I believe in you guys to help out. I can only make so many sock puppet accounts, so I'm really going to need your guys' help. So if you have relevant clips from Doom Debates, do share it on forums, on your private DM groups, share it with a friend on Messenger. You know what to do. And of course, it's going to be a virtuous cycle where the bigger this audience gets, the higher the profile guests that we can get, the higher quality debates we can have. And eventually, there's not going to be a lot of need for the Liron Reacts episode because I'm just going to go straight to the source. I'm just going to have the power to summon the guests and create primary source content where I ask them directly what their views are and find the crux of disagreement between their views and my views. So there's a sense in which a Doom debate screens off a reaction episode to somebody else's podcast. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing. And I'll see you next time on Doom Debates.